Section 10 of the Endeavour Journal of Sir Joseph Banks, Journal from 25 August 1768 to 12 July 1771, by Joseph Banks. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Gail Timmerman Vaughan. Section 10, April 1769, Part 1. 1769, April 1. Something better today. As my complaint has something in it that at least puts me in mind of the scurvy, I took up the lemon juice put up by Dr. Hume's direction, and found that which was concentrated by evaporating 6 galls into less than 2 has kept as well as anything could do. The small keg in which was lemon juice with 1/5 of brandy was also very good. The large part of it had leaked out by some fault in the keg. This therefore I began to make use of immediately, drinking very weak punch made with it for my common liquor. 1769, April 2. Many birds today about noon passed by the ship, making a noise something like gulls. They were black upon the back and white under the belly, probably of the sterna kind. In company with them were 20 or 30 men-of-war birds, soaring over the flock, probably the whole in pursuit of a shoal of fish. 1769, April 3. Several of the same kinds of birds seen today as were seen yesterday, also many egg birds. The trade continued to blow fresh, with very pleasant weather. 1769, April 4. At 10 this morn my servant, Peter Briscoe, saw the land which we had almost passed by. We stood towards it and found it to be a small island, Lagoon Island, about 1½ or 2 miles in length. Those who were upon the topmast head distinguished it to be nearly circular, and to have a lagoon or pool of water in the middle, which occupied much the largest part of the island. About noon we were close to it, within a mile or thereabouts, and distinctly saw inhabitants upon it, of whom we counted 24. They appeared to us through our glasses to be tall, and to have very large heads, or possibly much hair, upon them. 11 of them walked along the beach abreast of the ship, with each a pole or pike, as long again as himself in his hand, and every one of them stark naked, and appearing of a brown copper colour. As soon, however, as the ship had fairly passed the island, they retired higher up on the beach, and seemed to put on some clothes, or at least cover themselves with something which made them appear of a light colour. The island was covered with trees of very many different verdures. The palms or cocoa-nut trees we could plainly distinguish, particularly 2 that were amazingly taller than their fellows, and at a distance bore a great resemblance to a flag. The land seemed all very low, though at a distance several parts of it appeared high, yet when we came near to them they proved to be clumps of palms. Under the shade of these were the houses of the natives, in places cleared of all underwood, so that pleasanter groves cannot be imagined, at least so they appeared to us, whose eyes had so long been unused to any other objects than water and sky. After dinner land was again seen, which we came up with at sunset. It proved a small island, not more than 3/4 of a mile in length, but almost round. We ran within less than a mile of it, but saw no signs of inhabitants, nor any cocoa-nut trees, or indeed any that bore the least resemblance to palms, though there were many sorts of trees, or at least many varieties of verdure. In the neighbourhood of both this and the other island were many birds, man-of-war birds, and a small black sort of sterna, with a white spot on its head, which the seamen called noddies, but said that they were much smaller than the West Indian noddies. While we were near the island a large fish was taken, with a towing line baited with a piece of pork rind cut like a swallow's tail. Small sketch. The seamen called it a kingfish, Scombra lanceolatus. 1769, April 5. Less wind this morn than yesterday, with some showers of rain. While we were at dinner word was brought down that there was land in sight from the masthead, and found it a low island, but of much greater extent than either of those seen yesterday, being from 10 to 15 leagues in circumference. Myself remained at the masthead the whole evening, admiring its extraordinary structure. In shape it appeared to be like a bow, the wood and string of which was land, and the parts within occupied by a large lake of water, which bore about the same proportion to the land as the void space within the bow does to the string and wood. The string of the bow was a flat beach without any signs of vegetation on it, but heaps of seaweed laying in ridges, as higher or lower tides had left them. This was 3 or 4 leagues long, and appeared not more than 200 yards wide in any part, though doubtless as flat objects foreshorten themselves so much, it might be much more. The horns or angles of the bow were 2 large tufts of cocoa-nut trees, and much the largest part of its arch was filled up likewise with trees of different heights and appearances. A small part of it, however, was in my opinion low, and like the string. Here some thought there was an opening into the pool in the centre, and myself cannot say there was not. Indeed, it was at so great a distance that all must conjecture. Along the low beach or bowstring we sailed within less than a league of the shore, till sunset, when we judged ourselves about half-way between the two horns. We then brought to and sounded. 130 fathom of line out, and no ground. Night, which came on here almost instantly after sunset, made us lose sight of the land before the line was well hauled in. We then steered by the sound of the breakers, which were very distinctly heard in the ship, till we were clear of all. That this land was inhabited appeared clearly by 3 smokes in different parts of the island, which we saw repeated several different times, probably as signals from one to the other of our approach. Our second lieutenant affirmed that he saw from the deck many inhabitants in the first clump of trees, that they were walking to and fro, as if on their ordinary business without taking the least notice of the ship. He saw also many houses and canoes holed up under the trees. To this I only say that I did not see them, or know that anyone else had, till the ship had passed the place 1/2 an hour. 1769, April 6. Pleasant breeze. At 11:30 land in sight again, and 3 came up with it, proved to be distinct islands with many small ones near them, joined by reefs under the water. The islands themselves were long thin strips of land, ranging in all directions, sometimes 10 or more miles in length, but never more than 1/4 of a mile broad. Upon them were many cocoanut and other trees, and many inhabitants, several of whom came out in canoes as far as the reefs, but would not come without them. 6 particularly, who for some time walked along shore abreast of the ship, on our passing the end of the island, launched 2 canoes with great quickness and dexterity, and 3 getting into each, they put off, as we thought, intending to come to us. The ship was brought to, and we waited some time, but they, like their fellows, came no farther than the reef, where they stopped, and waited for 2 messengers who we saw dispatched from the great canoes, wading and swimming towards them along the reef. They met, and after a council, I suppose, resolved not to come off. The ship, after waiting some time, stood off, and when 2 or 3 miles from the shore was followed by a canoe with a sail, but not thinking it worth while to bring 2 for her, she soon gave over the chase and returned to the reef. The people seemed, as well as we could judge, who were a good half-mile from the shore, to be about our size and well made, of a dark brown complexion, stark naked, wearing their hair tied back with a fillet, which passed round their head and kept it sticking out behind like a bush. The greatest number of them carried in their hands 2 weapons, one a slender pole from 10 to 14 feet in length, at one end of which was a small knob or point, not unlike the point of a spear. The other, not above 4 feet long, made much like a paddle, as possibly it was intended, for their canoes were very different in size. The 2 which we saw them launch seemed not intended to carry more than barely the 3 men who had got into each of them. Others there were which had 6 and some 7 men. One of these hoisted a sail which did not seem to reach above 6 feet high above the boat. This, as soon as they came into the reef and stopped their boat, they took down and converted into a shed to shelter them from a small shower of rain which then fell. The canoe which followed us to sea hoisted a sail like an English lug sail, and near as lofty as an English boat of the same size would have carried. The people on the shore made many signals, but whether they meant to frighten us away or invite us ashore it is difficult to tell. They waved with their hands and seemed to beckon us to them, but they were assembled together with clubs and staves, as they would have done had they meant to oppose us. Their signs we answered by waving our hats, and shouting, which they answered by shouting again. Our situation made it very improper to try them farther. We wanted nothing. The island was too trifling to be an object worth taking possession of. Had we therefore, out of mere curiosity, hoisted out a boat, and the natives by attacking us oblige us to destroy some of them, the only reason we could give for it would be the desire for satisfying a useless curiosity. We shall soon, by our connections with the inhabitants of George's Island, who already know our strength, and if they do not love, at least fear us, gain some knowledge of the customs of these savages, or possibly persuade one of them to come with us, who may serve as an interpreter, and give us an opportunity hereafter of landing wherever we please, without running the risk of being obliged to commit the cruelties which the Spaniards and most others, who have been in these seas, have often brought themselves under the dreadful necessity of being guilty of, for guilty I must call it. 1769, April 7. This morn at daybreak land is in sight again. By 8 o'clock came up with an island, made up like the last, of narrow strips of land and reefs of rock. The greatest part of the land looked green and pleasant, but it was without coconut trees or any signs of inhabitants. I purposely omit to mention the size of these islands, as it is almost impossible to guess at, and very difficult to give an idea of the contents of narrow strips of land which run one within another, as a riband thrown carelessly down would do. If you measure the length of it, it 4 or 5 times exceeds the space of sea that it occupies. If the circumference, such land of 100 leagues in circumference, would scarce contain 100 square miles. If the space of sea that they occupy, you err as much, for of that 20, 40, nay, sometimes 100 parts are sea for one of land, though that sea is so shut in by banks and reefs that no ship can get into it. 1769, April 8. Pleasant breeze, but we have as yet found the trade hardly so strong as it was in the Atlantic. At 2 o'clock land was seen from the masthead. The ship stands for it, and about sunset came abreast of it distant 2 leagues. It proved an island larger than any we had seen, as it extended 6 or 7 leagues. It was everywhere covered with plenty of large trees, probably coconuts, and it is also inhabited, as we judge from a smoke rising from among the trees. In everything it appeared exactly of the same nature with the rest which we have seen. We could plainly distinguish it in some places, broken off into reefs, behind which we saw distant land, and thence judged that there was a lagoon within it. The land, however, appeared to be broader than any we had seen before. 1769, April 9. Fine weather and pleasant breeze. It is now almost night, and time for me to wind up the clue of my this day's lucubrations. So, as we have found no island, I shall employ the time and paper which I had allotted to describe one in a work which I am sure will be more useful if not more entertaining, to all future navigators, by describing the method which we took to cure cabbage in England, which cabbage we have eat every day since we left Cape Horn, and have now good store of, remaining as good at least to our palates, and full as green and pleasing to the eye, as if it was brought fresh every morning at Covent Garden Market. Our steward has given me the receipt, which I shall copy exactly, false spelling excepted. Take a strong iron-bound cask, for no weak or wooden-bound one should ever be trusted in a long voyage. Take out the head, and when the whole is well cleaned, cover the bottom with salt. Then take a cabbage, and stripping off the outside leaves, take the rest leaf by leaf, till you come to the heart, which cut into 4. These leaves and heart lay upon the salt, about 2 or 3 inches thick, and sprinkle salt pretty thick over them, and lay cabbage upon the salt stratum super thick, until the cask is full. Then lay on the head of the cask with a weight, which in 5 or 6 days will have pressed the cabbage into a much smaller compass. After this, fill up the cask with more cabbage, as before directed, and head it up. N.B. The cabbage should be gathered in dry weather some time after sunrise, that the dew may not be upon it. Halves of cabbages are better for keeping than single leaves. 1769, April 10. Last night a halo was observed round the moon, which was followed by a very disagreeable night, the wind being all round the compass, and sometimes blowing very fresh, with severe thunder and lightning, and very heavy rain. This morning the wind from north to northwest, the weather very hazy and thick. About 9 it cleared up a little, and showed us Osnabrück Island, discovered by the Dolphin in her last voyage. It was distant about 6 leagues, and appeared like a very short cone. Very light winds northwest. About 1, land was seen ahead in the direction of George's Land. It was, however, so faint that very few could see it. Soon after it was seen off the deck in the same faint manner, but appearing high. Our distance when it was first seen was 25 leagues. At sunset the ship was nearly abreast Osnabrück Island, 2 or 3 leagues from it. It appeared to have many trees upon it, but in some parts the rocks were quite bare. At this time it remained in dispute whether what had been so long seen to the westward was really land or only vapours. Myself went to the masthead, but the sunset was cloudy, and we could see nothing of it. As soon as I came down, a shark at the stern attacked the net in which tomorrow's dinner was towing to freshen. We hooked and took him just as it became dark. 1769, April 11. Up at 5 this morn to examine the shark, who proves to be a blue shark, Squalus glaucus. While we were doing it, 3 more came under the stern, of which we soon caught 2, which were common grey sharks, Squalus carcarius. On one of them were some sucking fish, Echinus remora. The seamen tell us that the blue shark is worst of all sharks to eat. Indeed, his smell is so abominably strong, so as we had 2 of the better sort, he was hove overboard. Little wind and variable with squalls from all points of the compass, bringing heavy rain. George's Island in sight, appearing very high in the same direction as the land, was seen last night. So I found the fault was in our eyes yesterday, though the non-seers were much more numerous in the ship than the seers. Today and yesterday many birds were about the ship, among which a bird which I took to be the tropic bird, Phaeton aetherius, was one. He was about the size of our tropic bird, but differed from him in having black bars upon his back, and the long feathers in his white tail. So much, I say, but the weather was so uncertain that I could not go out to shoot one. Calm this even. At sunset George's Land appeared plain, though we had not neared it much. Since the clouds went from the tops of the hills, it appeared less high than it did, though it certainly is very high. As I am now on the brink of going ashore after a long passage, thank God, in as good health as a man can be, I shall fill a little paper in describing the means which I have taken to prevent the scurvy in particular. The ship was supplied by the Admiralty with sauerkraut, which I eat of constantly, till our salted cabbage was opened, which I prefer as a pleasant substitute. Wort was served out almost constantly. Of this I drank from a pint or more every evening, but all this did not so entirely check the distemper as to prevent my feeling some small effects of it. About a fortnight ago my gums swelled, and some small pimples rose in the inside of my mouth, which threatened to become ulcers. I then flew to the lemon juice which had been put up for me according to Dr. Hume's method, described in his book, and in his letter which is inserted here. Every kind of liquor which I used was made sour, with a lemon juice No. 3, so that I took near 6 ounces a day of it. The effect of this was surprising. In less than a week my gums became as firm as ever, and at this time I am troubled with nothing but a few pimples on my face, which have not deterred me from leaving off the juice entirely. 1769, April 12. George's Land sighted. Very nearly calm all last night. George's Land was now but little nearer to us than last night. The tops of the hills were wrapped in clouds. About 7 a small breeze sprung up and we saw some canoes coming off to us. By 10 or 11 they were up with us. I forbear to say anything about either people or canoes, as I shall have so many better opportunities of observing them. We, however, bought their cargoes, consisting of fruits and cocoa-nuts, which were very acceptable to us after our long passage. 1769, April 13. Arrival, Port Royal Bay. This morn early came to an anchor in Port Royal Bay, King George III's island. Before the anchor was down we were surrounded by a large number of canoes, who traded very quietly and civilly, for beads chiefly, in exchange for which they gave cocoa-nuts, breadfruit, both roasted and raw, some small fish, and apples. They had one pig with them, which they refused to sell for nails upon any account, but repeatedly offered it for a hatchet. Of these we had very few on board, so thought it better to let the pig go away than to give one of them in exchange, knowing from the authority of those who had been here before, that if we once did it, they would never lower the price. As soon as the anchors were well down, the boats were hoisted out, and we all went ashore, where we were met by some hundreds of the inhabitants, whose faces at least gave evident signs that we were not unwelcome guests, though they at first hardly dare approach us. After a little time they became very familiar. The first who approached us came creeping almost on his hands and knees, and gave us a green bough, the token of peace. This we received, and immediately each gathered a green bough and carried in our hands. They marched with us about half a mile, then made a general stop, and scraping the ground from the plants that grew upon it, every one of the principals threw his bough down upon the bare place, and made signs that we should do the same. The marines were drawn up and marching in order dropped each a bough upon those that the Indians had laid down. We all followed their example, and thus peace was concluded. We then walked into the woods, followed by the whole train, to whom we gave beads and small presents. In this manner we walked for 4 or 5 miles, under groves of cocoa-nut and breadfruit trees, loaded with a profusion of fruit, and giving the most grateful shade I have ever experienced. Under these were the inhabitants of the people, most of them without walls. In short, the scene we saw was the truest picture of an Arcadia, of which we were going to be kings, that the imagination can form. Our pleasure in seeing this was, however, not a little allayed by finding in all our walk only 2 hogs, and not 1 fowl. The Dolphin's people, who were with us, told us that the people who we saw were only of the common sort, and that the bettermost had certainly removed. As a proof of this, they took us to the place where the Queen's Palace formerly stood, of which there were no traces left. We, however, resolved not to be discouraged at this, but to proceed tomorrow morning in search of the place to which these superior people had retreated, in hopes to make the same peace with them, as we have done with our friends, the blackguards. 1769, April 14. This morn several canoes came on board, among which were 2, in which were people who, by their dress and appearance, seemed to be of a rank superior to those who we had seen yesterday. These we invited to come on board, and on coming into the cabin each singled out his friend. One took the captain and the other me. They took off a large part of their clothes, and each dressed his friend with them he took off. In return for this, we presented them with each a hatchet and some beads. They made many signs to us, desiring us to go to the places where they lived to the southwest of where we lay. The boats were hoisted out, and we took them with us, and immediately proceeded according to their directions. After rowing about a league, they beckoned us inshore, and showed us a long house, where they gave us to understand that they lived. Here we landed, and were met by some hundreds of inhabitants, who conducted us into the long house. Mats were spread, and we were desired to sit down, fronting an old man who we had not before seen. He immediately ordered a cock and hen to be brought, which were presented to Captain Cook and me. We accepted of the present. Then a piece of cloth was presented to each of us, perfumed after their manner, not disagreeably, which they took great pains to make us understand. My piece of cloth was 11 yards long and 2 wide. For this I made return by presenting him with a large laced silk neckcloth I had on, and a linen pocket handkerchief. These he immediately put on him, and seemed to be much pleased with. After this ceremony was over, we walked freely about several large houses, attended by the ladies, who showed us all kinds of civilities our situation could admit of. But as there were no places of retirement, the houses being entirely without walls, we had not an opportunity of putting their politeness to every test that maybe some of us would not have failed to have done had circumstances been more favourable. Indeed, we had no reason to doubt any part of their politeness, as by their frequently pointing to the mats on the ground, and sometimes by force seating themselves and us upon them, they plainly showed that they were much less jealous of observation than we were. We now took our leave of our friendly chief, and proceeded along shore for about a mile, when we were met by a throng of people, at the head of whom appeared another chief. We had learnt the ceremony we were to go through, which was to receive the green bough, which was always brought to us at every fresh meeting, and to ratify the peace of which that was the emblem, by laying our hands on our breasts and saying "Tayo," which I imagine signifies friend. The bough was here offered and accepted, and in return every one of us said "Tayo." The chief made us signs that if we chose to eat, he had victuals ready. We accepted the offer, and dined heartily on fish and breadfruit, with plantains, etc., dressed after their way. Raw fish was offered to us, which it seems they themselves eat. The adventures of this entertainment I much wish to record particularly, but am so much hurried by attending the Indians ashore almost all day long, that I fear I shall scarce understand my own language when I read it again. Our chief's own wife, ugly enough in conscience, did me the honour, with very little invitation, to squat down on the mats close by me. No sooner had she done so than I espied among the common crowd a very pretty girl, with a fire in her eyes that I had not before seen in the country. Unconscious of the dignity of my companion, I beckoned to the other, who after some entreaties came and sat on the other side of me. I was then desirous of getting rid of my former companion, so I ceased to attend to her, and loaded my pretty girl with beads and every present I could think pleasing to her. The other showed much disgust, but did not quit her place, and continued to supply me with fish and coconut milk. How this would have ended is hard to say. It was interrupted by an accident, which gave us an opportunity of seeing much of the people's manners. Dr. Solander and another gentleman, who had not been in as good company as myself, found that their pockets had been picked. One had lost a snuff-box, the other an opera-glass. Complaint was made to the chief, and to give it weight I started up from the ground, and striking the butt of my gun made a rattling noise, which I had before used in our walk, to frighten the people and keep them at a distance. Upon this, as a signal, every one of the common sort, among whom was my pretty girl, ran like sheep from the house, leaving us with only the chief, his 3 wives, and 2 or 3 better dressed than the rest, whose quality I do not yet guess at. The chief then took me by the hand to the other end of the house, where lay a large quantity of their cloth. This he offered to me piece by piece, making signs that if it would make amends, I might take any part of it. I put it back, and by signs told him that I wanted nothing but our own which his people had stole. On this he gave me into charge of my faithful companion, his wife, who had never budged an inch from my elbow. With her I sat down on the mat and conversed by signs for near 1/2 an hour, after which time he came back, bringing the snuff-box and the case of the opera-glass, which with vast pleasure in his countenance he returned to the owners. But his face soon changed when he was shown that the case was empty, which ought to have been full. He then took me by the hand and walked along shore with great rapidity, about a mile. By the way, he received a piece of cloth from a woman, which he carried in his hand. At last we came to a house in which we were received by a woman. To her he gave the cloth he had, and told us to give her some beads. The cloth and beads were left on the floor by us, and she went out. She stayed about 1/4 hour, and then returned, bringing the glass in her hand, with a vast expression of joy on her countenance, for few faces have I seen which have more expression in them than those of these people. The beads were now returned, with a positive resolution of not accepting them, and the cloth was as resolutely forced upon Dr. Solander as a recompense for his loss. We then made a new present of beads to the lady, and our ceremonies ended, we returned to the ship, admiring a policy at least equal to any we had seen in civilized countries, exercised by people who have never had any advantage but mere natural instinct, uninstructed by the example of any civilized country. End of section 10.